dangerous sexual fetishist.
Young women are being killed in the Willamette Valley, and they have enough bodies to make the public very concerned.
We knew that we had a vicious killer out there somewhere.
Where are these young women going?
At that point, we didn't know much more.
One by one, young Oregon women disappeared.
He took my hair and rounded around like a fulcrum and started beating my head on the basement floor.
But the act of killing was only foreplay.
He enjoyed killing these girls and mutilating the bodies. This was thrill to him. Absolutely enjoyed it.
It was a slow Saturday night, and they ate us out.
Jerome Henry Brudos, the lust killer. On May 10th, 1969, fishermen made a disturbing discovery on Oregon's Long Tom River. Bobbing on the current was a woman's body, weighted to something on the river bottom.
There had been 3 or 4 disappearances of young girls, and there was sort of a feeling of hysteria almost in the communities.
4 women were missing. The floating corpse confirmed one family's worst fears. It was Linda Saley.
Linda Saley. She had been abducted from the Lloyd shopping area, a large shopping area in Portland.
She'd been strangled to death and thrown into the river, her body tied to an automobile transmission. Divers combed the river. 2 days later, they found another body. Karen Sprinker, missing since March 27th, had also been strangled.
We realized that we were dealing with probably a serial killer.
Jerome Henry Brudos, future electrician, future serial killer, was born in Webster, South Dakota on January 31st, 1939. With the end of the Great Depression still 2 long years away, farm families in the Dakotas struggled to keep going. In search of greener pastures, Jerome's father Henry moved the family to Oregon. There he hoped to find a stable job and a good place to raise his family.
His parents pick up stakes and they move to the Willamette Valley. It has Portland at its north end, Eugene at its south end, and the state capital, Salem, in the middle. Just a little bit south of the state capital is the town of Corvallis. And Jerome Brudos had come to a place that was actually kind of an idyllic place to grow up for a young boy.
But Jerome's childhood proved neither happy nor stable. With jobs so scarce, the family moved frequently.
He went to several different schools as he was growing up. I don't think he ever felt secure with his family.
Jerome's father worked 2 jobs, leaving little time for a home life. Lacking a father figure, the young boy often found himself alone with his prudish, no-nonsense mother Eileen. Prone to emotional tirades, Eileen didn't hide her abounding love for her oldest son, Larry, or her deep resentment of her youngest son, Jerry.
Jerome Brudos was born to a woman who really wanted a girl. Now, we always hear about families or fathers who say, I really want a boy, but to imagine a mother who says, I really want a girl, I don't want a boy.
How a boy, and later a man, is treated by his first relationship with a woman, his mother, is very important. If he felt that he was sort of abandoned by her and simultaneously that she almost had a lot of anger towards him for even having been born, there can definitely be a feeling of some type of backlash.
Eileen regularly chastised and punished Jerome. One incident involved a pair of patent leather high-heel shoes little Jerry found in a dump.
Here's 5-year-old Jerome Brudos. He finds this pair of women's shoes. Something had made him pick those up rather than looking for a dump truck or a toy tractor to play with. So he brings home this pair of women's shoes and he begins to wear them around the house.
When Eileen discovered Jerome wearing the shoes, she made him promise to get rid of them.
The shoes became taboo, and her reaction to the shoes, he didn't understand why she was so adamant that he shouldn't have those. And she berated him emotionally. So he kept those shoes.
And he kept playing with them. When Eileen discovered his deception, she became enraged.
She was really out of control, burning the shoes in front of him.
In his case, he gets this message from his mom of very strong disapproval, that this is wrong, that this is nasty, it's dirty, and he's not to be doing it.
That fueled the flame of his anger to the point where that's probably when he really started feeling powerless and vulnerable, and that combined with anger and frustration can lead to a path of destruction later on down the line.
Far from dissuading him, his mother's reaction fed his fixation. Footwear became the focus of his emerging sexuality.
He started to associate that sexual arousal with that aggressiveness, with the forbidden aspect of the shoes, and that blossomed into this very strong fetish.
Having moved in 1955, Jerome found himself living next door to a family with teenage daughters. He began to indulge his fantasies. Now 16, Jerome obsessed over the young women, going so far as to steal their underwear from a laundry line.
This was his way of satisfying himself sexually, because Jerome was a very ordinary, average-looking person. He would not have been appealing to girls of his age.
When police received calls about the thefts, Jerome saw an opportunity. He told one of the neighboring girls that he worked with the police. He persuaded her to come to his house to discuss the crimes. When she arrived, he greeted her, then disappeared.
Jerome went into a separate room, put on a mask, and came back.
The masked figure held a knife to the girl's throat and ordered her to strip.
She's forced to disrobe. He takes pictures, runs out of the room.
As the terrified girl fled the scene, Jerome pleaded with her to come back, claiming a stranger had locked him in the barn.
I was trying to convince her that it wasn't him that was doing it.
The girl doubted Brudos, but didn't report him. Having escaped consequences, he became more daring. While giving a local girl a ride home one day, he stopped at a deserted farm. There, he ordered her to strip. When she refused, Brudos became enraged.
He takes her out, beats her.
It was sadistic and it was violent. And he was, into puberty then, and that's normally when the more violent aspects start being acted out.
A couple driving by saw the struggle and called police.
They arrest him, he confesses, and then the things are found, the shoes, the underwear, the camera.
Investigators discovered naked photos of Jerome's neighbor. They questioned her and she described his attack. Corvallis police knew that they had arrested a disturbed teenager. But no one suspected the horrible crimes that this freckle-faced kid was capable of. And when set free, Jerome Brudos and his disturbing sexual fantasies would quickly spiral out of control. In 1956, 17-year-old Jerome Brudos was a deeply troubled teen. He had a fetish for women's shoes and underwear, which he stole and secretly wore. He'd been arrested after beating one girl and forcing another to strip at knife point. Authorities sent Jerome to Oregon State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation and treatment. Doctors rehabilitated.
Most people have seen the movie. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson. That's the hospital. That's the building that he went to. And if you saw the kind of pathology that was exhibited in that movie, that's the kind of environment that a young Jerome Brudos went into.
There, Jerome told psychiatrists about his fantasies. He envisioned an underground prison where he could stash captured girls.
He'd go by certain cells or something. He could pull out a girl whenever he wanted to.
These desires, born in the disturbed mind of a sexual fetishist, did not alarm Jerome's psychiatrists. Unfortunately, the experts saw it in a more benign light.
They let him go to school during the day and then come back to the hospital at night. And yet when they sat down to look at what he'd been doing and the way he'd been acting, they found, well, he's not really suffering from anything that's permanent. It's just, again, the same kind of explanation that his parents were giving. It's a phase. He'll grow out of it.
January 1957, after 9 months in the Oregon State Hospital, psychiatrists diagnosed Brudos as borderline schizophrenic. In spite of this diagnosis, they deemed him safe to live in society and released him. Brudos went home to finish high school. Although he demonstrated clear intelligence, excelling at electronics, he lacked the motivation to succeed and graduated near the bottom of his class. After failing to find a job, Brudos enlisted in the Army in 1959. The Army stationed him in Fort Ord in Monterey Bay, California.
He ends up going into the Army, and he has these weird fantasies and dreams and things that just aren't real. And then he ends up going to see the shrink, and the shrink decides this guy is too disturbing to leave in the Army, so we're going to get rid of him.
Discharged by the Army because of his peculiar obsessions, he returned to Oregon to live with his mother. It was a cold reception. Eileen insisted that Jerome sleep in the shed behind her house. He soon lapsed into his old habits. He stole women's shoes and underwear, and as the pressure of his compulsions increased, he again turned to assaulting women.
In broad daylight, he tried to kidnap a lady that worked for the telephone company. She was coming back from lunch, and as she was going into her office, he tried to grab her.
When she resisted, he choked her. She fell to the ground, unconscious. He took her shoes and left her lying there.
What was growing inside his head was getting worse because, like most compulsions, the first things you're compelled to do are apparently satisfying to you in some way, sexual or psychological, but at some point they're not enough, so you have to do more.
Jerome Brudos, still a virgin, wasn't sure how to do more. Since moving home, he worked as an engineer at a local radio station. A friend at the station set him up on a date with a pretty 17-year-old named Ralphine.
That was the first positive thing, the first interacting social behavior that he'd ever engaged in.
Ralphine became smitten with what she saw as a responsible, well-off 23-year-old man. He showed her romance and gentle affection. When Ralphine became pregnant, her reluctant parents consented to a marriage. The couple married in the spring of 1962. Ralphine, young and naive, initially complied with the demands of her older, very controlling husband.
He does things like tell her that she's to walk around and do housework and cook in the kitchen naked except for a pair of high heels.
Jerome also forbade Ralphine to enter his basement workshop. There he built a darkroom to print X-rated pictures.
There were pictures of Ralphine in various states of dress and undress with some of these items of clothing that he had stolen from other places.
In Ralphine, Jerry created the captive doll wife he always dreamed of. At first, the docile and inexperienced young woman thought nothing of her husband's odd demands.
People are always looking for the best in other people, and we want to explain away unusual or odd behaviors. And when you're married to somebody like that, it just becomes part of the way that you deal with protecting yourself.
Jerome couldn't keep a job, and the family moved constantly. Gradually, Ralphine grew more assertive. She refused to be photographed or play Jerome's dress-up games. As Ralphine pulled away, Brudos sought other ways to fulfill his sexual fantasies. He secretly dressed in women's clothing, often wearing women's underwear under his work clothes. To feed his fetish, Brudos stole clothes from women he fancied.
Psychologically, stealing women's clothing gives him a sense that he's in control of women, whether they like him to be or not.
And a chance meeting on the streets of downtown Portland gave him a target.
He saw this good-looking girl in downtown Portland, and he followed her for a couple blocks, and she got onto a bus. He got on the bus with her, followed her home.
Brudos watched the woman enter her apartment and waited until she went to bed.
And he went into the apartment, again, was stealing some of her clothes. She awoke. He jumped on the bed, strangled her, and had sex with her.
With the rape, Jerry slipped further into his sadistic fantasy world. The next step would be all too easy. For 10 years after his teenage incarceration at the Oregon State Hospital, Jerome Brudos managed to stay under the radar of the law. In 1967, as an electrician, husband, and father, the 28-year-old appeared to be a model citizen, but under the surface simmered disturbing and increasingly violent desires. Shortly after the birth of his second child, Brudos attacked and raped a woman.
The raping of the woman really describes psychopathic progression. He's acting out, he's getting bolder, he's getting braver, he has more confidence in his ability to commit these kinds of crimes and go undetected.
And frustrations at home drove Jerome to greater excess. His wife Ralphine busied herself raising their 2 children. She had no time to indulge his sexual fantasies. In a bid for attention, he left startling photos of himself around the house for his wife to find.
There were photographs of Jerome dressed in women's clothing, hose and high heels.
His wife ignored the cross-dressing photos, and increasingly, Brudos spent time alone in his basement workshop.
When these people get married, they pick somebody who's not really going to ask too many questions. She doesn't really want to know the full story. I think that would be too psychologically damaging.
On January 26, 1968, 19-year-old Linda Slauson walked door to door in the Brudos' neighborhood, selling encyclopedias. She met Jerome working in his yard. He sounded enthusiastic about her encyclopedias, so she followed him into the house.
Lured her down to the basement, the pretense of wanting to not bother the people upstairs. And once he had her down in the basement, walked up behind her and hit her over the head with a 2x4.
The blow didn't kill her. Brudos finished the job by strangling Linda until her body went limp. Next, he went upstairs, gave his wife some money, and told her to take the kids out for fast food.
The hallmarks of psychopathy are this lack of empathy, a sense of entitlement, narcissism. Most serial killers are psychopaths. It is the personality disorder that allows them to commit a homicide and come up and deal with their family as if nothing's happened.
With his family out of the house, Brudos acted out his sexual fantasies with his dead victim.
For certain serial killers, the good parts for them are the interaction with the dead body. And that control and that closeness that they have. Control.
Choosing from his collection of women's underwear, Brudos dressed Slauson's body in high heels and lingerie. He snapped photograph after photograph.
He took a hacksaw and cut off one of her feet. He saved that as a trophy, put it in the freezer that he had, periodically took it out. It was a fetish item, and put a female shoe on it, masturbated, got sexual arousal from it.
Late at night, while his family slept, Brudos loaded the remains of Linda Slauson's corpse into his car. He tied the body to an automobile transmission and tossed it into the Long Tom River. The following day, Linda Slauson's family began a frantic missing persons search. Oregon State Police were stymied. Privately, Jerome Henry Brudos basked in the afterglow of his first murder. It would be 10 months before he would kill again.
With serial killers, there's going to be that cooling off period, and that cooling off period will start to probably get shorter and shorter as they go along.
In the intervening months, Jerome moved his family to Salem. Their new house had a separate garage, perfect for a very private workshop. On the night of November 26, 1968, while driving home from work, Jerome encountered Jan Whitney. Whitney's car had stalled on Interstate 5.
He stopped, thought she was nice looking, was another potential victim. He told her he would fix her car, but he had to go to Salem to get some tools.
Jerry drove Jan to Salem and left her in the car while he went into his house. When he returned to the car, he slid into the back seat behind her.
took a leather postal strap, strangled her with it, opened the car door, slammed it so the strap was affixed to her neck, and committed his atrocities while she was dying.
Brudos raped the dying girl on the front seat of his family automobile.
Jerome Brudos and his sick desires are taking him places he's never been before. He's now raping a woman's dead body, and then finally at the end of that, leaving her hanging from a hook like a piece of meat in his garage.
There's also an underlying current of violence and anger in him, a feeling that he had a very bad relationship with his mother, that he feels very angry that he wasn't what she wanted, that there's a lot of shame. And that shame is tied up in sexuality because his mother did not want him wearing women's shoes. And that representation of sexuality he transferred onto women in general in the society.
Brudos kept the body of Jan Whitney hanging in the garage for 5 days, repeatedly assaulting her corpse.
Jerry Brudos would be a lust killer. The lust killer will kill and have sex with them after death. And so necrophilia is one of his primary motivations.
With Whitney's body still hanging, Jerome took his family away for the long weekend. While they vacationed, a freak accident occurred at the house, nearly exposing Jerome's dark secrets.
A car had run into his garage in part of his workshop. And somebody called the police. The police came out and was looking at the accident.
The unsuspecting police never saw Whitney's body.
And the officer himself actually had tried to look into the garage through a crack in the boards. Had he have seen inside, Jan Susan Whitney was hanging in that workshop.
Brudos thrilled at his close call with the police.
He thought he was highly intelligent. The police were, down